are you all doing tonight? Have you ever met a diplomat like this woman? It's really an honor to be here with all of you tonight. I'd like to start with a story, and it's a success story about a chance encounter that changed my life. It happened 6 years ago. I was, at the time, a reporter at the Financial Times, and my job was to cover Hong Kong and southern China. But the truth was, I hardly knew anything about China. What I did know was that I wanted to meet more of the people in its factories. If you think about China and its story, the story of the last 2 decades of its amazing growth is really a story about people, about the 700 million individuals who make up its workforce. Among those 700 million people are 150 million migrant workers who leave their families and their farms in the countryside every year and pack up and move to the cities in search of work. 150 million people. If you think about it, that's like the population of Brazil packing up every year and moving to London. Or, as many of you who've been to the Chinese countryside know, it's sort of like a country packing up and moving from the 18th century to the 21st century. And many of these people moved to southern China. If you look at southern China today from space, you'll see first the tops of factories beneath you. And if you could see beneath the rows of those tops of factories, you would be able to see inside the factories rows of young women. And beneath their bowed heads and their shoulders, you would see their work. The products that are made by these young women, these remarkable young women, and they are mostly women, they leave the factories in neat lines that are loaded onto trucks, and those trucks take them to container ships and into airplanes, and they come all the way to us. I was curious about these invisible women, these women that nobody sees, yet women who produce things that all of us see and use every day. All of us here tonight are wearing or carrying something made by these women. So late one night, 6 years ago, a young man from an NGO just across the border in China took me to one of these factory districts to a worker dormitory. And as we approached the building, I could see that it was a giant building. I looked up, it must have been about 8 stories tall. It was shaped like a U, and even at night I could see this laundry fluttering outside every window. That was really the only indication of just how many people lived inside this building. So we go in through a dark opening in the side of the building, and we start to climb up and up and up all the way in the dark until we get to the 8th floor, to a room labeled 817. And I don't know what I expected to find behind that door, but I definitely was nervous. At that point, the only people I met in China were stern-faced executives and government officials, people who wanted nothing to do with a foreign reporter like me. And the factories that I had seen were, in my opinion, they had conditions that were almost Dickensian. But the door opened, and inside, it was like another brighter world. Inside room 817 were a dozen teenage girls in their pajamas, shouting and laughing and playing with each other's hair and talking on the telephone. And along the lines, along the outside of the room, there were bunk beds. And these girls had turned the bunk beds into their own little homes. They'd hung these flowery bed sheets outside, and then inside they'd stacked pillows and teddy bears, and underneath they parked high-heeled shoes. Who knew that Chinese factory workers wore high-heeled shoes? And then they stacked these boxes of photographs that they brought from their farms back home. And they tugged on our arms and they pulled us into the center of the room and they said, "You have to eat." And so they gave us oranges and they gave us freshly made sweet porridge. Somewhere in this room that didn't even have a proper bathroom, much less a kitchen, they had figured out a way to cook. What made these girls' energy, optimism, and resourcefulness so incredible to me was that I knew they had just finished a 14-hour shift. And for that 14-hour shift, each of the hours, they had probably earned about 60 US cents an hour. Now, their factory didn't have insurance, so if they got sick or pregnant or injured on the job, they'd probably get fired. There was no union, there was no HR department. There was no one to turn to if they were sexually harassed or if they had any kind of problem on the job. And at the same time, if they were late to work or if they went to the bathroom too many times, they'd probably get fined. Because these girls were born in the countryside, they had no legal right to any of the state-subsidized medical services at the state hospitals in the cities where they worked. They had no legal right to send their kids to school at one of the state-subsidized schools. If they wanted to bring their kids with them from the countryside, they'd have to pay 2 or 3 times what a local legal resident had to pay to send their kids to school. Had these girls been born in a city or born to a different set of parents, they probably would have been finishing high school or college. But as it was, these girls hadn't even finished junior high school. I remember walking away that night so inspired, but also feeling a really strong sense of responsibility that I had to tell the world what I had seen. I believe that if Western consumers saw what I had seen, if they knew just how bad the conditions were in these factories, that together we could stand up and do something about these conditions. I felt sure that if I made these invisible workers visible, that if I brought them into focus, into the Western consciousness, that we could all together rise up and challenge the Chinese government and multinationals and tell them to put a stop to these sweatshops. Well, none of that happened. Nobody stopped shopping, and perhaps it was a little naive of me to think that someone was going to organize a protest or that we were all going to call up Walmart and ask them where our sweater was made and under what conditions and by whom. After my book came out, I did have a lot of opportunities to talk on radio and television about these issues. And I received a lot of really lovely letters from people who said that the stories in my book had moved them. But readers kept coming back to me with the same question: what can we do? And the truth was that I didn't really have a good answer. I knew what had to change in the big picture. I knew that China needed to crack down on sweatshops, that multinationals needed to stop demanding ever lower prices from Chinese factories. But I didn't know what you and I could do as individuals. So there I was in this catch-22. I had dug deep down into the lives of these workers, these invisible workers, but I hadn't given anyone the tools to make change. And then the financial crisis hit. And at the height of the financial crisis, this is about 2 years ago now, I traveled to rural China, to a province called Jiangxi, to visit one of the girls of room 817. This girl was one of 23 million migrant workers who at the time had lost their jobs as a result of the financial crisis. And there was real concern in Beijing and here in Hong Kong and among economists and investment banks that there was going to be blood on the streets in China. That these migrant workers were going to take to the streets because they'd lost their jobs, peasants with pitchforks protesting that the economy had slowed down and that now they were jobless. So I went back to China in order to talk to workers who were affected by the financial crisis. So there I was, the provincial capital of Jiangxi province, and I went and sat down on a bus to head out into the rural areas. The bus began to fill with migrant workers in their winter coats and bringing all their belongings home for the New Year holiday. And as usual in these kind of situations, when I'm the only foreigner on the bus, all of the seats around me filled up, and the seat next to me remained empty until it was the last seat on the bus, and a man finally sat down. A man in his 40s, and as the bus started rolling, we got talking. And he told me that he'd been working in the factories making shoes for the last 13 years, and that the money he had earned was putting his 2 daughters through school, one through high school and the other through college. But when the financial crisis hit, he saw the writing on the wall. The factories around his were starting to close down. They were laying off workers. And so I asked him, "Aren't you angry?" And he told me he wasn't angry at all. This guy could not have been less angry. He said, "I've been thinking about starting my own business, And this financial crisis seems like a good time to do it. It was just the kick in the pants I needed. Over the next several days, I heard that same note of optimism over and over. I would meet with someone like a construction worker or a woman who made boots, a woman who made mugs. And they would tell me their story that they had lost their jobs. And I would listen and I'd ask them, "Are you angry?" And they all looked at me. They were so perplexed. They said, "Why would we be angry?" And so I thought, well, I'll walk them through the logic that everyone in Beijing and Hong Kong was articulating. I said, well, the financial crisis has caused you to lose your job, and you therefore have no means of earning a living, and thus you must be angry at someone. And once again, my naivete about these workers, I assumed that these workers wouldn't have a global perspective, but they did. They told me that the financial crisis began in the US with the banks, and that it then spread to the global economy, and China was no exception, that the Chinese government had rolled out a package of stimulus measures, and that they were trying to soften the blow on the Chinese economy. That they were trying to find work, and in fact that it was their responsibility as workers to find their own jobs. And I realized at that point that these workers knew nothing but uncertainty. That they didn't depend on the government for anything. Not their jobs, not their health care, not their pensions. They were so rational, so pragmatic. I wanted to put them on American cable television just to inject a note of sanity into the debate. But in all seriousness, there I was again. I had gone back into the Chinese countryside expecting to find the worst. And what I found was optimism, was drive, was an entrepreneurial spirit. I'd also found clear thinking and a real hunger for knowledge. The girls of room 817 have a resourcefulness that is a response to their tough circumstances. So there is no classified ad system for Chinese migrant workers. There's no centralized database that they can go to and find jobs that are opening up in Guangdong or in Wenzhou. And so these girls have developed a very modern telephone tree. They use social networking sites and their mobile phones to keep in touch with workers around the country. And that network allows them to keep a running tally in their heads of what the wages, working conditions, and living costs are of factories all around the country. These networks also allow them to gather other very crucial information, like where do you get a fake university diploma? Where is the best fake Prada bag available? But also, where do you get a flu treated when you can't go to a state-subsidized hospital? What I'm trying to say is that these girls are not only optimistic, they're not only driven, they're also smart. Take, for example, one of the girls of room 817. Her name is Yuan Meng. And Yuan Meng is a second-generation migrant worker. Her parents left her family when she was a child and went out into the cities to work at construction sites in southern China. And so when Yuan Meng was old enough, she followed her parents and she went and worked in the factories. And by the time I met her, Yuan Meng was still very young, but she had already worked in all sorts of factories. She made everything from artificial Christmas trees to office supplies. And when I saw her last time, she was working in a Korean electronics factory. And if you listen to Yuan Meng's CV, her resume, it sounds like she has incredible job experience. But Yuan Meng doesn't see it that way. She told me that the skills she learned at one factory were never useful in the next. What she wanted was transferable skills, skills that would give her autonomy and independence. That conversation with Yuan Meng really stuck with me. And that theme kept coming up again and again. I was talking to a migrant worker earlier this year, just a couple months ago, who had just quit her job at one factory to take a lower paying job at another factory. And the reason was because the new factory, the lower paying job, offered her training in quality control at night. And she told me that at the old factory, we just watched TV at night. But at the new factory, we get to study. What I finally realized, talking to these workers, is that if we were to make a difference in these girls' lives, we need to do more than just share their stories. In fact, telling their stories is just the first step. The next step is rolling up our sleeves and doing something to help. It's no secret what the girls of Roommate 17 want. They want to get off the treadmill of factory work. They want jobs that give them autonomy. Ultimately, many of them want to run their own businesses. I was talking to another of the girls of Roommate 17 recently, and she told me she estimates, this is her own estimation, that 90% of migrant workers in China want to own their own businesses someday. The problem is that none of them know how to go about it. And another problem is nobody in the system wants to train them in how to run their own businesses. If you think about it, the factories and the big Western brands just want these girls to stay in their jobs, keep their heads down, and keep making the products for the global supply chain. If you think about it as well from the perspective of the NGOs, NGOs are mostly focused on improving the quality of life in those factories. And cities, the state government officials all want to move their cities up the value chain, to stop making sweaters and start making software. So I've realized that my contribution could be to help these workers start to chart their course out of the factories and to start preparing them for starting their own businesses. And so I decided to start an initiative I call the Bus to Success. Now, the Bus to Success is still in its infancy, but the essential concept is that it is a mobile training facility that travels from industrial district to industrial district in southern China, giving female migrant workers, the skills that they need to start getting out of the factories and moving on to start their own businesses. Skills like, how do you write a business plan? How do you deal with your customers? How do you market your products and services? Ultimately, how do you rent office space? These kind of skills are exactly the kind of skills that girls have told me they want. But ultimately, the curriculum has to be designed by the girls themselves. So the curriculum for the Bus to Success will be designed by the girls of Roommate 17. And they will be intimately involved in shaping the direction of the project. As I said, this is the very beginning of the journey for the Bus to Success. And it would hugely benefit from all the wisdom and insights in this room and the kind of creative thinking that characterizes, that defines the TED community. I would love to hear from all of you about how we can turn the Bus to Success into the most powerful tool possible to empower women. Since I started thinking about the Bus to Success, I let my mind run to questions that I couldn't even imagine 6 years ago when I visited that dark dormitory. Questions like, what if one of the girls on the bus who trained on the Bus to Success went on to create the next Sony? What if one of the girls from the Bus to Success went on to start her own factory that treated workers in a completely better way than before? What if the girls who trained on the Bus to Success had daughters who went on to high school and then to college and then to get PhDs? My hope, I began our conversation this evening by saying that this is a story of success. My hope is that our shared success story is just beginning this evening. China's migrant women are tough, they are driven, and they are full of dreams. The best thing that all of us can do is to help them find ways to make those dreams a reality. Thank you very much.